and many of them want to do the right thing. I can absolutely verify that that's true because I have seen this in over 10 universities where kids that everybody gave up on as uninformed and uncaring about their environment stood up and gave me an ovation for a book about a poor kid from the inner city of Pittsburgh. And many of them said, we want to be you when we grow up, and we want to do the things that you're contributing to the world. That was a great honor, and it continues to be a great honor. In that book, however, it underscores a number of deep concerns that I have about the current state of public education in our country. And that includes the state of Ohio and my home state in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. 15 years ago, when I began to look more critically at the education system beyond Pittsburgh, and at that point, the public school system across America and in my own community was at a point of virtual collapse. I believe the road ahead is as difficult as the road behind. And while it is difficult to imagine the situation getting worse for African American kids and Hispanic kids, it has gotten worse. Dropout rates in most urban centers back then were averaging 30% for minorities and closing in on 20% for white kids 15 years ago. Today, the national dropout rate for African American and Hispanic kids is 50% in the United States of America. That is called a tsunami by any reasonable definition. And it is unsustainable in our country if these children who were born into the world as assets, not liabilities, are unable to complete their high school experience at the rate of 50%. I don't know of any industry in the world that could sustain itself if the product was 50% defective. And unfortunately, we've come to accept that in our country, and it's got to stop. Literacy levels and computational skills have regressed, and incredibly, child rearing centers are now appearing in high schools, while art programs oftentimes are disappearing due to a drastic reduction in public funding. Metal detectors are now standard operating practice in many urban schools. They are the first thing that often greets students in the morning, along with cameras and steel gray doors. Many of those schools, including several in my city, once led the nation in national merit scholars. And in Pittsburgh, we are hoping to regain that prestigious status because in Pittsburgh, we are fortunate to have a superintendent committed to excellence and innovation who I believe, along with his board, can lead us to regaining prominence as an academic leader and model for the nation. Regrettably, in many districts, however, what now exists are security guards, metal detectors, and fear as the basis for the provision of education. Children are often afraid to go to school and to perform well when they get there. In our country, there now exists a phenomenon in which children, of whom many are African American and Hispanic, are harassed for performing well academically. An absolute reversal in our value system of the past. Tragically, in most urban schools, this has become the norm and not the exception. In other words, many schools resemble places of incarceration rather than places of hope. One would think that I am describing a place from hell itself, but in fact I am not. It is the state of the current condition. Fortunately, in the case of Pittsburgh, the community brought in executive leadership that possesses the belief in the future of education and is willing to form community-based strategies involving centers like mine on behalf of at-risk kids. In fact, We are using this partnership model to replicate both the program and the outcomes, including a new partnership with the Cleveland school system and a newly formed organization called the Cleveland Center for Arts and Technology, sponsored by the Cleveland Foundation. I am very honored to be here to make these known facts public. We have the executive leader here who's doing a great job, and many of the foundation staff who have been instrumental in helping to develop this strategy, I might add, in record time. And we're now using, as I mentioned in the preamble, this template we were developing in Cleveland as the template for many of the cities we're working with around the country and eventually around the world. So as incredible as it sounds, a person from Pittsburgh is thanking Cleveland for offering me a very powerful image and structure to scale a national model. That's called a hopeful sign. I believe that there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of situations in school districts that are much worse relative to the circumstances of African American students, and some districts have totally collapsed. The net result of these failures can be directly measured in the lives and productivity that is lost due to the thousands of children who will not play a contributing role in industry, commerce, or their community. In other words, they will not be contributing assets in any sense of the word. On the liability side, it is, or should be obvious, that children who fail to graduate from school and achieve the basic life skills of reading, math, and language are condemned to a life of high unemployment, transient lifestyle, broken families, often accompanied with alcohol, drug abuse, and domestic violence. The costs on the liability side relative to lost possibilities are enormous because, in part, the cost of policing, incarceration, emergency medical care, and life subsidy is almost beyond calculation. In Pittsburgh, we have a partnership with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. We train technicians for the medical center. And the president of the hospital said one of the reasons that he wanted to form a partnership with my program was not only to get technicians, but because he had heard that the students that I was working with in the arts were going on to college in record numbers. And he said, I want you to understand that because those children are going to college in record numbers, many of them will not be in my emergency room with bullets in their head. It now costs us $200,000 a kid to take the bullets out of their head. You're in the healthcare business. The future of healthcare is keeping people out of hospitals, not putting them in hospitals. And then many times you're doing it as well as my own emergency room physicians. We as a nation are spending on police power, medical assistance, and life income subsidies more than the budgets of whole nations on our planet. In Pennsylvania, it costs approximately $40,000 per year to keep a person in jail, most of whom were high school or public school dropouts, roughly the same amount these days for a good pre-medical education. In other words, our culture and our society are prepared to spend that kind of money to put people in prison and would be reluctant to support those same African American and Hispanic kids go to medical school. To me, that makes no sense. And we've got to create a system of values and circumstance that can change the way that we think about this problem. And I would strongly suggest we do it quickly. In Pennsylvania, the average private school tuition is about $16,000 to $18,000 per year. I am aware of school systems that spend a similar amount with dramatically different outcomes. It is my hope that with this magnitude of investment, We can soon begin to see outcomes for African American and Hispanic children